The stars had always called to humanity. For centuries, they had looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. Now, in the year 2347, they knew the answer. The universe was vast, beautiful, and very dangerous. Admiral Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of his ship, the U.S. Resolute. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the Earth fleet for 32 years. He had seen things that would give most people nightmares. But nothing had prepared him for what was happening now. The holographic display in front of him showed hundreds of red dots moving through space. Each dot was an enemy warship. The Valari Dominion had finally made their move. "How many ships?" Nathan asked. His voice was calm, but his hands were clenched tight behind his back. Commander Lisa Morgan checked her console. She was young, barely 30, but she was the best tactical officer Nathan had ever worked with. 312 confirmed vessels, Admiral. More are jumping in every few minutes. Nathan nodded slowly. He had expected this day would come. Everyone had expected it. The Valari had been conquering species across the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They were insectoid beings, tall and thin with hard shells covering their bodies. They had 4 arms and eyes that saw in every direction. They felt no mercy. They knew no fear. And they believed they were destined to rule all living things. 6 months ago, Ambassador Victoria Lane had stood before the Valori High Command. She was a small woman with silver hair and a voice like steel. She had delivered Earth's message clearly and without emotion. The Alari people were under human protection. The Alari were a peaceful species who lived in the oceans of their world. They had no weapons. They had no army. They had asked humanity for help, and humanity had said yes. If the Valari attacked the Alari, Earth would respond. The Valari commander had laughed at her. The sound was horrible, like metal scraping against metal. He told her that humanity was young and foolish. The Valari had crushed empires that were old when humanity was still living in caves. What could humans possibly do against the might of the Dominion? Victoria had not smiled. She had not shown any fear. She simply repeated the warning one more time and left. Now the Valori were here in the Kepler 442 system. The Alari homeworld floated peacefully below, its blue ocean sparkling in the light of its sun. The Alari had no idea that death was coming for them. Or maybe they did know, and they were simply trusting that their human friends would keep their promise. Nathan thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 12 years old. She wanted to be a pilot someday. He wondered if she would grow up in a galaxy where the strong simply crushed the weak, or if she would live in a better universe. "Admiral," Lisa said, her voice tight. "The Valori flagship is broadcasting a message. They want the Alari to surrender immediately. They say resistance will result in complete extermination." Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped, somehow, that it would not come to this. But hope was a luxury he could not afford right now. "Open a channel to the Valori flagship," he said. The view screen flickered, and then the face of a Valori commander appeared. His name was Executor Vrethanok. He was famous throughout the galaxy for his cruelty. He had personally ordered the destruction of 17 worlds. Millions of beings had died because of his commands. "Human," Vrethanok said. His voice buzzed and clicked. "You are in our way. Move your little ship, or we will destroy you along with these water creatures." Nathan looked at the alien face on his screen. He felt no anger. He felt no fear. He only felt a cold certainty about what had to happen next. "Executor," Nathan said slowly, "this is your final warning. Step over the line and face retribution. Turn your fleet around and leave this system. If you do not, you will regret it." Vrethanok made that horrible laughing sound again. "You threaten me? One ship against 300. Your species is even more stupid than I thought. I am not threatening you, Nathan said. I am making you a promise. Humanity keeps its promises. We always have. We always will. This is your last chance. The Valori commander leaned forward. His many eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. Watch carefully, human. Watch what happens to those who waste my time. The view screen shifted to show a small human monitoring station floating in space nearby. It was unmanned, just computers and sensors. But it flew the Earth flag. A beam of green light shot out from the Valori flagship. The monitoring station exploded in a ball of fire and metal. The Earth flag burned and disappeared into the void. That is my answer, Vrethnok said. Now move aside, or join them. Nathan stood very still. Around him, his bridge crew was silent. They all knew what this meant. The line had been crossed. There was no going back now. Lisa, Nathan said quietly, send the signal to Earth Command. Code Prometheus. Authorization Col 77 Alpha. Lisa's fingers moved across her console. Signal sent, Admiral. Nathan looked back at the view screen. Vrethnok was still there, still smiling his alien smile, still certain of his victory. You have made a mistake today, Executor, Nathan said. The worst mistake of your very long life. You had a chance to walk away. You chose not to take it. Remember this moment. Remember that we warned you. He cut the transmission. The bridge was quiet. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for orders. Nathan walked to the central command chair and sat down. His bones ached. His heart was heavy, but his mind was clear. All hands, he announced through the ship's communication system. This is the Admiral. The Valori have rejected our warning. They have attacked Earth property. As of this moment, we are at war. Every one of you knows what that means. Every one of you knows what we have been preparing for. He paused and looked around at his crew. They were afraid. That was natural. But they were also ready. That was human. Fall back to position 7, Nathan ordered. Let them follow us. Let them think we are running. The Resolute turned and began to move away from the Valori fleet. Behind them, Vrethnok ordered his ships to pursue. He was laughing again. The foolish humans were fleeing. Just as he had expected, he had no idea that he was walking into a trap. He had no idea that across human space, shipyards were coming alive and weapons were being armed. He had no idea that humanity had been waiting for this moment for 50 years. The warning had been given. The warning had been ignored that now the retribution would begin. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth, there was a place that did not exist on any map. The tunnels went down for miles, carved into the ancient stone by machines that worked day and night for decades. This was the heart of human defense. This was where the decisions were made that would shape the future of the species. General Paul. Harris walked through the main corridor with heavy steps. He was 63 years old, built like a bear, with a face that looked like it had been carved from rock. He had fought in 3 wars and buried too many friends. He had hoped to retire next year and spend his remaining days fishing on a quiet lake somewhere. That dream was over now that the war room was massive. Screens covered every wall, showing star maps and fleet positions and intelligence reports. Representatives from every human colony world were present, some in person and some as holographic images. They had all received the signal from Admiral Cole. They all knew what it meant. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul said as he took his place at the head of the table, the Valori have crossed the line. They attacked our monitoring station in the Kepler 442 system. They have declared their intention to exterminate the Alari people who are under our protection. The room was silent. Everyone had known this day might come. But knowing something might happen and seeing it actually happen were two very different things. We need to vote, Paul continued. This is not a decision I can make alone. This is a decision for all of humanity. Do we go to war? One by one, the representatives spoke. The governor of Mars Colony said yes. The council leader from New Shanghai said yes. The elder from the Luna settlement said yes. Every single voice said the same thing. Humanity would fight. Paul nodded slowly. Then it is decided. Activate Protocol Prometheus. Across the room, Dr. Claire Bennett stood up from a chair. She was a thin woman with white hair and glasses that made her eyes look too large. She was 70 years old and had spent the last 50 years of her life working on a single project. She had sacrificed everything for it. Her marriage, her health, her chance at a normal life. All of it had been given to this moment. All systems are operational, Claire said. Her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear. It trembled from the weight of what she was about to unleash. The Shadow Fleet is ready. 412 warships, fully armed and crewed. They have been waiting in hidden positions across 17 star systems. On your order, they will move. The Shadow Fleet. For 50 years, humanity had built ships in secret. They had constructed shipyards inside asteroids. They had hidden weapons factories in the atmospheres of gas giants. They had trained crews in facilities that officially did not exist. All of it had been done quietly, carefully, without anyone outside of Earth knowing. The Valori Intelligence Service was considered the best in the galaxy. They had spies everywhere. They knew everything about everyone. But they had looked at humanity and seen only 80 small warships. They had calculated that humans posed no real threat. They had been very, very wrong. Send the order, Paul said. All ships are to converge on Kepler 442. Tell Admiral Brooks he has command of the Shadow Fleet. On the other side of human space, Admiral Kevin Brooks received the message aboard his ship, the U.S. Defiance. He was a quiet man with dark skin and calm eyes. He had been chosen for this command because he never panicked. No matter how bad things got, Kevin Brooks simply looked at the problem, found a solution, and executed it. He had no ego. He had no desire for glory. He only had a job to do, and he would do it perfectly. He looked around at his bridge crew. They were young, most of them. They had trained for years for a battle they hoped would never come. Now it was here. All ships, Kevin said into his communicator. This is Admiral Brooks. You know why we are here. You know what the Valori have done to countless species across this galaxy. You know what they plan to do to the Ilari. He paused and looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, 400 ships were listening to his words. We did not start this war. We tried to prevent it. We gave them every chance to turn back. They refused. They laughed at us. They think we are weak. They think we are afraid. Today, we show them how wrong they are. Across human space, engines came to life. Ships that have been dark and silent for years powered up their reactors. Weapon systems that had never been fired came online. Crews that had drilled countless times finally had a real mission. On the colony world of New Cascadia, Lieutenant Marcus Webb helped load civilians into underground shelters. He was 25 years old, a ground forces officer who had never seen real combat. His hands were shaking, but he kept working. There was no time for fear. His grandmother was there, a tiny woman of 92, who refused to go into the shelter until everyone else was safe. She had survived the famine wars of the 22nd century, when Earth had nearly destroyed itself. She had seen humanity at its worst and its best. Are you afraid? She asked Marcus as they worked. Yes, he admitted. I have never been so afraid in my life. His grandmother smiled and touched his face with her wrinkled hand. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But remember what I taught you. Humanity has faced extinction before. We have faced enemies who seemed impossible to defeat. And every single time, we found a way. That is what makes us human. We never give up. We never surrender. We keep fighting until the job is done. Marcus nodded and hugged her tight. Then he went back to work. In orbit above New Cascadia, ships were gathering. They came from every colony, from every station, from every hidden base. They moved through space like a great wave, all heading toward the same destination. Back on the Resolute, Admiral Nathan Cole watched his sensors as his ship fell back before the advancing Valori fleet. The enemy was following eagerly, sensing easy prey. They had no idea that they were being led into a trap. They had no idea that help was coming. Nathan allowed himself a small smile. The Valori thought they understood war. They thought they understood humanity. They were about to learn a very painful lesson. The gathering storm was almost ready to break, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same. Dr. Claire Bennett watched the screens in the war room as the Shadow Fleet assembled. Each green dot was a ship. Each ship was filled with men and women who had volunteered to defend their species and their allies. She had given them the weapons they needed. Now it was up to them to use those weapons well. She whispered a quiet prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Not for victory, not for glory, just for the safe return of as many of those brave souls as possible. The die was cast. The fleet was moving. The final warning had been given and ignored. Now humanity would show the Valori exactly why that was a mistake they would never live to regret. Executor Vrethanok stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the human ship run away. He felt nothing but contempt. For 1,000 years, the Valori Dominion had conquered every species they encountered. They had crushed mighty empires and enslaved billions. And now these soft, short-lived creatures thought they could stand against him? The human vessel continues to retreat, his second-in-command reported. They are falling back toward the fourth planet. Let them run, Vrethanok said. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his kind. They have nowhere to go. Order the fleet to pursue. Once we destroy their little ship, we will deal with the water creatures on the surface. The Valori fleet moved forward like a swarm of hungry insects. 300 ships, each one bristling with weapons, each one crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. They were so confident, so certain of victory. They did not even bother to scan for other ships in the system. Why would they? Their intelligence had told them everything they needed to know about human military strength. 80 vessels. That was all the humans had. Commander Sophie Turner watched the Valori fleet from her hiding spot. A ship, the Silent Wind, was a stealth vessel, designed to observe without being seen. It was small, only 20 crew members, but it carried some of the most advanced sensors in human space. Sophie was 34 years old, with short, red hair and freckles across her nose. She had spent her entire career in intelligence, gathering information and passing it along to the people who needed it. She had never fired a weapon in combat. But what she did was just as important as any warrior. They are moving into position, she said quietly into her communicator. Exactly where we predicted. They are not scanning for additional contacts. They have no idea we are here. On the other end of the communication, Admiral Brooks acknowledged her report. Good work, Commander. Maintain your position and keep observing. When the time comes, fall back to safe distance. Understood, Admiral. Good hunting. Sophie cut the connection and looked at her crew. They were all watching her, waiting for orders. She gave them a small nod. We have done our part. Now we watch and pray. Far away from the battle zone, on the third moon of Kepler 442b, the Valori had begun establishing a forward base. They were so confident of victory that they were already planning what to do after the battle. They would enslave the Alari and use them as workers in their underwater mining operations. They would strip this system of every valuable resource. And they would add another conquest to the long list of Valori victories. They had no idea that this moon would soon become their grave. On Earth. In a small apartment in the city of New Denver, Elena Cruz sat alone in the darkness. She was 28 years old, an engineer who had spent her entire adult life working on weapon systems. Her father had been a scientist on a research station near the border of Valori space. 15 years ago, when she was just 13, the Valori had raided that station. They had killed everyone aboard, including her father. Elena still remembered the day the news came. She remembered her mother's screams. She remembered the funeral where there was no body to bury because the Valori had left nothing behind. She remembered making a promise to herself that day. She would dedicate her life to making sure the Valori could never hurt anyone else. Now, watching the news feeds showing the fleet movements, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear for the people who would fight and die. Guilt that she was safe on Earth while others risked everything. And deep beneath all of that, a cold satisfaction that the Valori would finally face justice. "This is for you, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "This is for everyone they ever hurt." Back in the Kepler 442 system, the pieces were falling into place. The Valori fleet had spread out, chasing the Resolute toward the fourth planet. They were exactly where Admiral Cole had wanted them to be. Spread thin, overconfident, blind to the danger approaching from every direction. Admiral Brooks checked the time on his display. The Shadow Fleet was in position, hidden behind moons and asteroids and the planet itself. 400 ships, their systems powered down to minimum, waiting in silence like predators ready to strike. "All ships report ready," his communications officer said. "We are at full combat status." Kevin nodded slowly. He thought about his wife back on Earth. He thought about his two sons, both of them too young to understand what their father did for a living. He thought about all the families on all the ships in his fleet, all the people who would live or die based on the orders he gave in the next few minutes. "Open a channel to all ships," he said. "Fleet-wide broadcast." When the channel was open, he stood up from his chair and faced the view screen. He knew that his image was being transmitted to every vessel under his command. He wanted them to see his face. He wanted them to know that their commander was with them, not hiding in some bunker far from the fighting. "This is Admiral Brooks," he said. "In a few minutes we will engage the enemy. Some of us will not survive this battle. I will not lie to you about that. War is ugly and cruel, and people die. But I want you to remember something. We are not fighting for conquest. We are not fighting for glory. We are fighting for the Alari, who trusted us to protect them. We are fighting for every species that has suffered under Valori tyranny. We are fighting for the simple idea that the strong should protect the weak, not prey upon them." He paused and took a breath. Around him, his bridge crew was listening with fierce attention. "The Valori think they know us. They think we are soft. They think we are afraid. They are about to learn the truth. When humanity makes a promise, we keep it. When humanity draws a line, we defend it. And when humanity goes to war, we fight with everything we have." He raised his hand. "All ships, on my signal, to cloak and attack. Target their engines first, then their weapons. We want survivors. We want them to go home and tell their masters what happened here today. We want the entire galaxy to know that Earth keeps its promises." On the Eternal Conquest, Executor Rethanok was growing impatient. The human ship was still retreating, and the chase was taking too long. He wanted blood. He wanted to see the light fade from human eyes. "Order all ships to increase speed," he commanded. "I want that vessel destroyed within the hour." His second-in-command hesitated. "Executor, our formation is already stretched thin. If we accelerate further, we will lose tactical cohesion." Brethennock turned and struck his subordinate across the face with one of his forearms. "Do as I say. These are humans, not a real enemy. What possible threat could they pose?" At that exact moment, the sensor officer made a sound of alarm. "Executor. New contacts appearing. Many new contacts." Brethennock spun around to look at the tactical display. His blood ran cold. Ships were appearing everywhere. Behind them. Above them. Below them. From behind moons and asteroids, and from the shadow of the planet itself. Hundreds of ships, all of them powering weapons, all of them moving into attack formation. "That is impossible," Brethennock whispered. "The humans only have 80 vessels. Our intelligence confirmed it." His sensor officer looked up at him with fear in his many eyes. "Executor, I am counting over 400 enemy ships. They have us surrounded. For the first time in his very long life." Executor Brethennock felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid, and in that moment, Admiral Brooks gave the order to attack, and the sky filled with fire. The first wave of human missiles struck the Valori fleet before they could even raise their shields. Dozens of ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Debris scattered across space like seeds thrown by a careless hand. The Valori formation, already stretched thin from the chase, shattered completely. Captain Derek Shaw led the assault wing that targeted the enemy flagship. He was 41 years old, a veteran pilot who had flown everything from cargo haulers to fighter jets. His squadron moved through space with perfect coordination, dodging enemy fire and striking weak points with deadly accuracy. "Focus on their engines," Derek ordered through his communicator. "We want them dead in the water, not blown to pieces. Command wants survivors." His pilots obeyed without question. They had trained for years for this moment. They knew exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, alarms were screaming. Lights flashed red. Crew members ran in every direction, trying to respond to an attack that had come from nowhere. Executor Brethennock stood frozen at his command post. His mind could not accept what was happening. This was not how wars were supposed to go. The Valori were the conquerors. The Valori were the hunters. How had they become the prey? "Return fire!" he screamed. "All ships, return fire! Destroy them!" But his orders were useless. The Valori ships were scattered and confused. They fired their weapons randomly, hitting nothing but empty space. Some of them even hit each other in the chaos. The human ships, by contrast, moved like parts of a single machine. They communicated constantly, sharing information and coordinating attacks. When a Valori ship tried to target one human vessel, 3 others would strike from different angles. When a Valori captain tried to rally his nearby ships, human missiles would destroy his communications, array. Dr. Claire Bennett had spent 50 years developing these tactics and these weapons. She had studied every war the Valori had ever fought. She had learned their strategies, their weaknesses, their blind spots. She had designed human ships to exploit every single one of those weaknesses. The quantum disruptors were her masterpiece. Valori shields were famous throughout the galaxy. They could stop almost any weapon known to exist. But Claire had figured out how to create energy beams that vibrated at a frequency the shields could not block. When those beams hit Valori ships, they passed through the shields like they were not even there. Across the battlefield, Valori commanders watched in horror as their shields failed to protect them. They had never seen anything like this. They had never imagined that anyone could defeat their technology so completely. Admiral Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched the battle unfold. His ship had stopped running and had turned to join the fight. Around him, His crew worked with calm efficiency, firing weapons and coordinating with the rest of the fleet. "Admiral," Commander Elisa Morgan reported, "the enemy flagship has lost engine power. They are drifting. Their weapons are still active, but they cannot maneuver." Nathan nodded. "Signal Captain Shaw. Tell him to keep pressure on the flagship, but do not destroy it. I want Executor Vrethanok alive." He wanted the Valori commander to survive. He wanted Vrethanok to go home and tell his masters exactly what had happened. He wanted the entire Dominion to know that humanity was not to be underestimated. The battle continued for hours. Wave after wave of human ships pressed the attack. The Valori tried to organize a defense, but every time they formed up, the humans would strike from a new direction. It was like fighting smoke. No matter how hard they hit, the humans seemed to flow around them. On one of the smaller Valori vessels, a young warrior named Crickstow fought to keep his ship alive. He had joined the fleet only 6 months ago. He had been told that serving the Dominion was the highest honor. He had believed that the Valori were invincible. Now, watching his crewmates die around him, he understood that everything he had been taught was a lie. The humans fought differently than any enemy he had ever seen. They did not seek glory. They did not waste lives on pointless charges. Every move they made had a purpose. Every shot they fired hit its target. They were not warriors seeking honor. They were professionals doing a job. When a human missile finally struck Crickstow's ship, his last thought was that his commanders had made a terrible mistake. They had poked a beast. They did not understand that, as the 4th hour of the battle began, the outcome was no longer in doubt. 263 Valori ships had been destroyed. 42 had surrendered. The rest were fleeing, their engines pushed to maximum, their crews desperate to escape the trap they had walked into. Admiral Brooks ordered his ships to let the runners go. They wanted witnesses. They wanted stories to spread. They wanted every species in the galaxy to hear about what happened when you threatened humanity's friends on the eternal conquest. Executor Vrethanok sat in his command chair and stared at the destruction around him. His flagship was crippled. His fleet was shattered. His reputation was ruined. Everything he had built over centuries of conquest had been destroyed in a few short hours. The communications console crackled to life. A human face appeared on the screen. It was Admiral Cole, looking calm and composed despite the battle raging around them. "Executor Vrethanok," Nathan said, "your fleet is defeated. Your ships are destroyed or fleeing. You have lost." Vrethanok felt rage building inside him. "This is not over, human. The Dominion will send more ships. We will return with 1,000 vessels. We will burn your worlds to ash." Nathan shook his head slowly. "No, you will not. You will go home and tell your masters what happened here. You will tell them that humanity warned you. You will tell them that we gave you every chance to walk away. And you will tell them this: if the Dominion ever threatens Earth or any of our allies again, we will not stop at defending ourselves. We will come to your homeworld. We will burn your cities. We will end your empire forever." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We are not conquerors," Nathan continued. "We do not want your territory. We do not want your people as slaves. We only want to live in peace with our friends and allies. But make no mistake, Executor. If you force us to fight, we will fight with everything we have. And we will win." Vrethanok wanted to scream. He wanted to threaten. He wanted to promise revenge. But looking at the human's calm face, he realized something that broke his spirit completely. The human was not bluffing. The human was not posturing. The human was simply stating facts. If the Dominion continued this war, they would lose. "Not just this battle, but everything. What do you want from me?" Vrethanok asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want you to deliver a message to your high command," Nathan said. "Tell them that Earth has issued its final warning. The line has been drawn. Anyone who crosses that line will face retribution. Today was just a demonstration. Next time, we will not be so merciful." He paused and leaned forward slightly. "Do we understand each other, Executor?" For a long moment, Brethanok was silent. Then, slowly, he bowed his head. "Yes," he said. "I understand." Nathan nodded. "Good. You may collect your survivors and leave. Go home, Executor. Tell your people what you saw here. And pray that we never have to meet again." The transmission ended. The Valori, ships that could still move, began limping toward the edge of the system. The Battle of Kepler 442 was over. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never forget. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, every spacefaring species knew what had happened at Kepler 442. The mighty Valori Dominion, the empire that had conquered half the known galaxy, had been crushed by the humans. 300 ships against 400, and the Valori had lost almost everything. But it was not just the numbers that shocked the galaxy. It was how the humans had fought. They had hidden their true strength for 50 years. They had let the Valori believe they were weak. And when the time came, they had struck with a fury that no one had ever expected. Species that had lived in fear of the Dominion for centuries suddenly saw an opportunity. If the humans could defeat the Valori, then maybe the Valori were not invincible after all. Maybe there was hope. The first rebellion began on a world called Thrainfor, where a reptilian species called the Kasari had been enslaved for over 200 years. They rose up against their Valori masters, using whatever weapons they could find. At first, the Dominion tried to crush them, but they were still recovering from the disaster at Kepler 442. They did not have enough ships to fight a war on multiple fronts. More rebellions followed. The Dominion that had seemed so powerful just months ago began to crack and crumble. Within 10 years, it had collapsed completely, broken apart into dozens of smaller states and free territories. Ambassador Victoria Lane stood before the Galactic Assembly and addressed representatives from over 300 species. The Assembly had existed for centuries, but it had always been weak, unable to stand against empires like the Valori. Now, with the Dominion gone, there was a chance to build something better. Humanity does not seek to replace the Valori as rulers of the galaxy, Victoria said. Her voice was clear and strong. We do not want an empire. We do not want subjects. We only want to live in peace, trading and cooperating with our neighbors. But we will not stand by and watch innocent species be conquered and enslaved. If anyone threatens the weak and the helpless, Earth will stand with those who cannot defend themselves. The Assembly listened in silence. Many of them had expected the humans to claim the Valori's territory. That was how things had always worked. The strong conquered the weak, and the cycle repeated forever. But the humans were offering something different. Partnership instead of domination. Protection instead of exploitation. It was a new idea for many of them. It would take time to understand, but it was a beginning. The Alari, the peaceful ocean dwellers that humanity had defended, became Earth's closest allies. They were not warriors. They could not help humanity fight battles. But they were artists and philosophers and scientists. They shared their knowledge freely with their human friends. They composed songs and poems celebrating the humans who had saved them. One of those poems became famous across the galaxy. It was called The Promise Keepers, and it told the story of how Earth had stood alone against a mighty empire to protect a species they barely knew. On the colony world of New Cascadia, Lieutenant Marcus Webb helped rebuild what the war had damaged. The fighting had not reached the planet directly, but fear and uncertainty had taken their toll. People had lost homes and businesses during the evacuation. Some had lost family members who had served in the fleet. Marcus worked alongside civilians, clearing rubble and repairing buildings. He was no longer afraid. The battle was won. The future was bright. But he knew that the peace they enjoyed had been bought with blood. He would never forget that his grandmother, lived long enough to see the peace secured. She passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 94, surrounded by her family. Her last words to Marcus were simple. "I always knew humanity would make things right. We just had to be brave enough to try." Marcus carried those words with him for the rest of his life. Dr. Claire Bennett retired to a small house on Luna, where she could look up at the stars whenever she wanted. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for a war she hoped would never come. Now that the war was over, she did not know what to do with herself. She spent her days reading and gardening and watching the Earth rise over the lunar horizon. Sometimes reporters would come and ask her about the weapons she had designed. She always refused to talk about it. The weapons had served their purpose. They had protected humanity and its allies. She did not want to become famous for building tools of destruction. Elena Cruz took over Claire's position at the Defense Research Institute. She was young, but she had proven herself during the crisis. She threw herself into her work with the same dedication that Claire had shown. Not because she wanted war, but because she knew that peace had to be protected. The Valori were gone, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. There would always be someone ready to prey on the weak. "We stay strong so others can be safe," Elena told her team on her first day as director. "We build weapons so we never have to use them. And if we ever do have to use them, we make sure we win." Her team nodded. They understood. Humanity had learned a hard lesson over the centuries. Peace was precious, but it was not free. Someone had to be willing to fight for it. Admiral Nathan Cole retired from the fleet 5 years after the battle. He had been offered promotions and honors, but he had turned them all down. He had done what needed to be done. He did not want medals for it. He returned to Earth and bought a small farm in the countryside. He spent his days growing vegetables and watching the sunset. Sometimes his daughter would visit with her children, and Nathan would tell them stories about the stars. Not war stories. He never talked about the killing. He told them about the beauty of nebulas and the wonder of alien worlds and the amazing diversity of life in the universe. "Why did you fight, Grandpa?" his grandson asked him once. Nathan thought about the question for a long time. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he finally said. "Friends, family, people who cannot protect themselves. The idea that the strong should help the weak instead of hurting them. Those things are worth any sacrifice." His grandson nodded solemnly, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Children often understood things better than adults gave them credit for. Years passed. Decades passed. The Battle of Kepler 442 became history, then legend. But the lesson it taught was never forgotten. A new saying spread among the species of the galaxy. It was translated into 1,000 languages and repeated on 1,000,000 worlds. Befriend a human, and you have a friend forever. Threaten a human's friends, and you have made the worst enemy in the universe. It was a simple saying, but it contained a deep truth. Humanity was not the oldest species in the galaxy. They were not the strongest or the most advanced. But they had something that many older species had lost over the eons. They had heart. They had loyalty. They had the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The Valori had laughed when they received Earth's warning. They had believed that no young species could possibly threaten them. They had been wrong. Earth had issued its final warning. The galaxy had learned to listen, and among the stars, in the great emptiness between worlds. The name of humanity was spoken with respect and gratitude by all who valued freedom and justice. The humans had kept their promise. They always would.